afternoon, everyone, or good morning, afternoon, evening, depending on where you're joining us from. Welcome to this week's FOA Live. Jennifer Katrulya. I am co-president of FOA and excited to get to spend the time with you this week. I am solo, as you can see on today's show. Normally, I'd be joined by co-president Rush Olney. Rush and I have both actually been under the weather for the last week and working on bouncing back, but definitely, unfortunately, Rush is worse for wear today. So he's going to be sitting this one out, and we'll welcome him back on the next show. But thank you again. And I'm really excited about today's conversation. I am, of course, going to go through some housekeeping as we do at the start of these calls. And then I am going to be welcoming to the show today, Chukky Okobi. And so for those of you who I'm sure most are already well aware, 8-year NFL alumni drafted by his hometown team, the Pittsburgh Steelers. I promised Chukky I would give him a fair hard time since I am a Kansas City Chiefs fan, as many of you know, and actually he'll share a bit about his residency today. And but I had to give him a little bit of ribbing about being a Steelers alumni, and but he is. In today's world, a keynote speaker, corporate leadership trainer, executive mindset coach. And I recently had the chance to spend several hours with Chukky in a coffee shop as we got to know each other better, and incredibly generous, thoughtful human who's doing wonderful things in terms of really supporting, helping us become better humans, better business people. And he's got a great program he's put together. So excited in a couple of minutes to welcome him to the show. And Sander, who you all met in terms of production on our show, will kindly bring him in a moment. I do want to walk through and thank those who joined us in New York City 2 weeks ago now for the last Family Office Association lunch we had. It was great. We expected actually that day, for a number of reasons, a relatively small turnout of 8 to 10 of you. And I know we filled the room with I think we maxed at about the 50 to where they were adding other tables and stuff to the room. But it was a great event with everyone. Thanks to Mike Packman, FOA's chairman, for coming in and being part of that day. And then for those in Miami, want to thank Greg Palavos for generously allowing us to spend the time with him and in his environment out on the water for a little while for the Sunset Cruise. And for those who either made the trip into Miami or who took the time to join that afternoon, the conversations went well on into the next morning. And so, we always talk about the fact that the events themselves, whether it's a conference you're going to or some sort of organized gathering, those are informative and great way to spend time with each other and go through thought leadership and learning. But what I really encourage people to keep in mind is it's the hours afterward. It's the after dinners and the after conversations and the things that, venture back to the hotels where everybody's staying. And so those downtime hours afterward, where you find a lot of the relationships deepen, and to the extent that you find ways to collaborate with each other, that those things just progress over that time. So it was a really special time. It really took a lot away from it. And in terms of upcoming events, we're going to be updating the calendar, so please keep your eyes out. And we will be, for those in the Connecticut, New York area, we'll be seeing you June 23rd at Greenwich Polo Club. So excited to kick that back off. I will be in Kansas City with a number of you for the next few days this week. And then West Coast, we have some updates for you as well. So again, a number of things going on, and we're excited to share. Just reminders as we kick this off. If you're on live with us today, certainly welcome having you chat into the comments, and we'll do our best to respond during the show. If we don't answer or respond to you during the show, then we will make every effort to follow up either in the chat feed, or please feel free to direct message us. And as you listen to Chukky today, and as we go through that conversation, I'll share two things. First, if you have a question for him, if you have a follow-up, please message us within FOA, and we'll be sure to get those messages over to him and help facilitate responses there. And secondly, because as you hopefully can tell versus some of the other days we spent together, I too am a little bit under the weather today. Fortunately, we're in great hands. If you see me go off camera for a few minutes and have Chukky continue, it'll simply be so that I can freshen up a little bit and then rejoin. So again, appreciate all you. We didn't want to cancel today's show. We're excited, super excited to spend the time with you. So we're gonna walk through it. And so with that, Sander, if you don't mind, we're gonna bring in Chukky and kick off the conversation. Good afternoon, sir. A pleasure to have you on. Thanks for joining us today.
Always a pleasure to be in your presence, Jennifer. I'm very grateful for you guys having me on the show, and I'm excited to talk more about what I do and really go deeper into what family offices are really all about and how it pertains to my background in sports.
Well, again, a pleasure. And I know you were kind enough. We spent on a Sunday, I believe it was a Sunday. Yeah, it was Saturday, Sunday.
Yeah, it
We
was
spent a
Sunday.
few hours together, and you were incredibly gracious and so generous with your time and with your sharing. And so would love to have you kind of walk everyone through just your background, certainly well beyond what I've shared. And then we'll jump right into kind of what you're doing today and the impact you're making.
Well, I'm an 8-year NFL alumni. Was drafted by my hometown Pittsburgh Steelers. Now I know a lot of people listening and watching right now are from Kansas City, but there's no conflict here, and I'll come back to that. Because I have a pretty deep affection for Kansas. Not because I have affection for Kansas City too, and you'll see why in a moment. But obviously, born and raised in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, was initially drafted by my hometown Pittsburgh Steelers, and my unique professional experience of being able to win a Super Bowl, working for a globally successful family-owned company, it really gave me an intimate familiarity with the requisite mindset that leaders have to develop in order to discover the family business's full potential. And, the best approach to ensuring that the values that created that family wealth are maintained and improved upon by future generations. A big thing is really have a deep passion for sharing my stories of my experiences playing for the Rooney family and the Pittsburgh Steelers organization, number of Hall of Fame players that I played alongside, Hall of Fame coaches that I played for. And so my passion now is to share the wisdom that I gained from that professional success and empower family offices to create what I call generational wealth beyond money. And so, it's really about sharing that experience and giving people insight that perhaps they don't know that they don't know. And, having such a unique professional experience, I imagine that, there's not a lot of places where you can get the insight that, I want to offer. And so, to me, that's a big part of my background. But just to circle back around to the whole Kansas City Pittsburgh conflict,
yeah,
I actually do live in Kansas City now. So, I've been here for about 6 years, and it's been incredible. And one thing that a lot of people don't realize when you think about, our favorite teams, and I met somebody when I was in Hawaii a couple of weeks ago, and they were a big Cowboys fan, and they were hoping not to offend me by that. And I was like, not at all, not at all. You recognize that when we cheer for our favorite teams, coaches come and go, players come and go. It's the community that's a constant. The families that grow up in these regions. And so now that I am a resident of the Kansas City area, naturally, I have an affection for the Kansas City Chiefs and everything that I've been able to witness since I moved here, and the greatness that they're starting to cultivate within the culture of that business and in that team. And so, when you're cheering for your hometown where you live, the way I see it now is when I'm cheering for the Chiefs, I'm actually cheering for myself because I'm a part of this Kansas City community.
I love that, Chukky, and you just found such a gracious way to rise above the banter. I don't know if we'll totally let you off the hook, but I love that, and thank you very much for sharing that perspective. That actually is pretty cool, and I wouldn't have necessarily come up with that right off the bat myself. I'm going to keep sporting my red and giving you a hard time, but thank you very much, and you actually at the start of the call. We're talking about and would love to walk through, coming from a background in sports and having had so much of that in your career and such great success, the shift to family offices and the motivation to focus on working with families, where did that come from? How did that evolve?
You know, a lot of the work I do with people is connecting them with, their passion and their, whether it be their personal, professional, or spiritual path. And a lot of those passions go back to things that really moved us in childhood. So when you think about, for me, coming from Pittsburgh, one of the things that I was fascinated by at a very early age was the name Carnegie. And so when you think about Andrew Carnegie, and, you know, in this family business space, I imagine a lot of listeners will be familiar with this name. Well, he was an immigrant that moved to the United States, and he lived in the Pittsburgh area. So half the city is named after this guy. And I always was intrigued by, what was it about, Carnegie that made him so great that, when I'm looking around my environment, you've got a college named after him. You've got museums and libraries and all kinds of stuff. And they even got Carnegie Hall in New York. And so I've always been drawn to that particular character from history. One of my favorite characters from history is Andrew Carnegie. And, going into the NFL, part of my motivation was to create a similar legacy so that my name, my last name, Okobi, would, evoke the same thoughts, the same emotions, the same ideas, and the same meaning that Carnegie has to, to the city of Pittsburgh, to the United States. And when you think about the impact that he had on how we construct buildings and use steel in this world, I wanted to create a similar impact. And that a lot of times people think about sports, especially football, and the physicality of it, or what I call the shininess of it, Super Bowl parties and, parades and all of those things. But, winning the Super Bowl really connected me even deeper to this legacy that I wanted to leave, similar to Carnegie. And it's funny because, I was hired as a keynote speaker by a CEO here in Kansas City. And, when we first, connected and we're getting to know each other, and she asked me about my background, and she's like, so you mean to tell me you were born in Pittsburgh, drafted by the Steelers, and you won the Super Bowl? I bet that's incredible. I bet that feels amazing. But one thing most people don't realize is, yeah, it is a feeling, and it does feel amazing. And it's a feeling that most of us, all of us, I would say, are intimately familiar with. I mean, think back. We all have memories. So just think back of memories that gave you those butterflies in your stomach. The moments back then that made your pulse race and your breath shallow. You hear your heart beating in your ears. You see those things now, things that took you to levels of pleasure and satisfaction that felt so right. It almost feels wrong. And so if you have a memory like that, then you know exactly what it feels like to win the Super Bowl. Now, thinking about family offices and the work that I've done with family offices and leaders and the people they serve, the question we have to ask ourselves is, that Super Bowl feeling, why doesn't my office feel that way? Why doesn't my family feel that way? And the thing is, this is something we can cultivate within family businesses, and not just pass down the assets, but pass down the values that created that success. The same way as a first generation millionaire myself in the NFL, I was able to create that Super Bowl level of success. And so to me, it's really connecting that level of fulfillment and satisfaction in the legacy that we're creating, and taking that same sensation that I developed as a professional athlete and helping family offices to do the same with their legacy.
Well, and so when we think about that, Chukky, can you share a little bit more about, as you're doing this work and as you're really seeking to help raise all ships, and again, I know you and I spent some time talking about this. Can you talk about the value? You spend a lot of time as a speaker, a coach, working with families. Can you talk about a little bit about what that means, where you focus your time, and really the value that you're looking to bring to the families you're working with?
Well, the work I do with family offices and their people, a lot of it starts with understanding emotions and how to release emotional baggage, generational emotional baggage and stress, helping them to clarify what is this legacy that we're building. And most importantly, encouraging them to develop the mindset and the conviction that the values that created their wealth, in this, whatever that first generation was, that those values will be fostered and improved upon as the generations go by. And so, a lot of it comes down to understanding what the number one, from what I gained learning about Andrew Carnegie. When I read his autobiography, and he talked about when he wrote The Gospel of Wealth back in 1908. And in The Gospel of Wealth, he talked about what he believes are the requisites for anybody to be able to create that same type of legacy and success that he did. And believe it or not, most people would be surprised, but the number one requisite he identified is emotional discipline, and being able to navigate, emotions, being able to release them and stay focused on the positives that you're looking to cultivate within the world. And so a lot of the value that I do, is, helping people to release negative emotions, especially generational emotions. So that's the first thing. The second is getting clear on exactly what this legacy looks like, even beyond my lifetime. And so that the actions that I take now are consistent with the result that I see, 50, 100, 200 years from now. And so the big thing is, how do we do that? And so another aspect of the value that I, bring to family offices and people I work with is advanced communication skills. Big focus of family offices is being able to bridge the generational gap between all these different generations that we have. And so, you can imagine a lot of the challenges that people have in communicating with their children, and at the same time having this vision of these kids, who many of which are adults now. How are they going to be able to carry on the legacy that, our grandfather, great grandfather, or maybe even the success that the parent created within their generation? And I have to be able to transfer, the vision that I had when I started this thing onto the next generation. And a lot of people struggle to do that. You have families that are, they have a culture of not talking about money. And it's like, well, then how is, your daughter going to be able to continue the efforts that you took to create this immense wealth and all these assets? And so when you talk about emotional discipline, developing the proper mindset to clarify the legacy, and being able to communicate that legacy, that vision that you have for the value of your family name or family business. And that's a big focus of what I do, working with the leaders of family offices and, those people that they serve.
Well, and so you and I talked about actually the part of this and part of the communication process, and the learning really is not only dealing with challenges, but dealing with success. And so if it was your parent who had the success, or if parents are trying to deal with up and coming, new and different types of exploration and success in their children, can you talk to us about, how your experience of world-class success as a professional athlete translates to what you do, and how you communicate this with families?
Well, there's a lot of things that, anybody who's has that generational success, business success, there's a lot more parallels between professional sports and high level success in the family business. And the first thing that jumps to mind is understanding pressure and, feeling the pressure, especially when you think about kids who are growing up in a family. If hypothetically, if I was born into the Hunt family here in Kansas City, or born into the Rooney family in Pittsburgh, or born into the Carnegie or Vanderbilt or Rockefeller family, you can imagine the pressure that a child who has to bear that name may feel. And how do you navigate that emotionally, and how do you create your own identity as an individual? And so a lot of that, a lot of the pressures, you can imagine the pressure of playing in the Super Bowl, where there's millions of people watching on television. There's tens of thousands of people in the stands, in the ramifications of my own individual success on any given play in any given game, and what that means to the greater good of our fan base, of my teammates, and of the community that our team is representing. And so that pressure of having to perform at a high level and maintain a certain standard of performance in the optics, making sure that, the way that I present myself in public, thinking about a lot of the challenges that athletes, have had in terms of PR. And so a lot of these things are very similar, if not the same, for professional athletes and for those that are creating wealth in their family businesses. Another thing is, especially thinking about my challenges of when I left the NFL. And, you put so much into creating this persona, this identity as an athlete. And then all of a sudden, it's gone and you're no longer in the NFL. You're no longer a football player. And really looking to reinvent myself and create a new identity for myself. Now, again, going back to the example of growing up in a prestigious family or having to bear one of those prestigious names, it could be a challenge for a lot of adult children to feel self-sufficient, be able to stand on their own, be able to have an impact and make sure that their generation actually advances the name, not just, kind of getting lost in the shuffle. At the end of the day, if my last name is Carnegie, and obviously that's gonna be remembered, but hypothetically, I don't know if I'm calling anybody specific because I'm just picking a name out of the air right now. But if I'm John Carnegie, I don't want people just to remember Carnegie. I want them to remember John. And so it's really helping people to cultivate their own identity and determine what their individual contribution is to their overall family legacy. And so those, when you think about pro sports, you think about, what we're, creating a legacy in our business and in our family, there's a lot more parallels than people are aware of.
Well, and I think that dovetails really well into kind of a next question I have, which is you do obviously, as part of your success in professional sports and as part of, I know you've mentioned you're very disciplined even today in all the things you do. That's, coaching and repetition and practice. And so, and many people think about those things in terms of whether it's a sport or a job or in other areas of life. When you think about it in a family office setting, that idea of executive coaching or of having that mentoring may not be the first thing that people jump to. So can you talk, but it's obviously what you do and have really focused on with families. Can you talk a little bit about, that mindset, why families would even be thinking about, hey, how does coaching, fit with me? How is that something you deliver to families? What's going on in your world as you're seeing it today?
As family offices are very focused on, managing financial affairs, the thing about hiring a coach is, you have to think about the difference of working towards net worth versus self-worth. And so there's a lot of people who, maybe inherited or for whatever reason, had a windfall of cash within this generation and may feel, guilty for whatever reason. It's funny because, when I first connected with my coach, and he talked about, have you ever been embarrassed of your success? And no one had ever asked me that before.
Yeah.
And it was funny because where I was at that time, that was exactly what was going on. And he was able to articulate it better than I was at that time. And so when you think about, being able to communicate and pass down the wisdom to the next generation, a lot of, where coaching is learning those effective communication skills, other areas of personal development in terms of emotional discipline, to create that, the values around that, and really think about, what is it that I could be better at? Because, think about it. We're both working in this family office space. How many people do we know who have a lot of wealth and not much else?
Yeah.
And I've known people who are worth, billions, but don't have any real friends. that don't, that have put so much effort and focus into building such a prestigious company or brand or name, but don't really know their kids all that well.
Right.
And so these are things that, when you think about the what would, be most fulfilling to me in life, it's, my net worth and my self-worth got to be balanced. It can't always be about the money. It can't always be about the assets. It's like, especially people in that leadership position, because when you're at that leadership position where most of the people around you, their livelihood, relies on, gaining your favor. And
Mhm.
so when they have a problem, eventually it's going to move up the ladder to you. But what happens when that CEO or that leader of the company or dad, whoever's at the top of the food chain, who does he go to when he's having a problem? And the thing is, no matter how much money we have, there's no amount of money that can heal a broken heart. And so the challenge is the emotional challenge, the human experience. No matter how much money you have, there's no escaping it. And at the same time, we want to make sure that we heal those things within ourselves so that our children don't have to carry the burden of that into adulthood and, struggle, make the same mistakes as a parent that maybe we believe we're making right now. And so it's really about making sure that as each generation comes along, that the family dynamic, the meaning of that word family, the emotions and the ideas that are synonymous with our family name continue to evolve from generation to generation. And actually, I want to give you an example that may seem a little to the left, but being a Chiefs fan, I think you'll appreciate it. So, what comes to mind with this particular question is Patrick Mahomes. And I don't know Patrick Mahomes personally, but most people are unaware that the name Patrick Mahomes has been synonymous with professional sports success for a long time in baseball. And so, Patrick Mahomes II, his dad's name was Patrick Mahomes. But what I want you to think about is what the younger Patrick Mahomes, how he's redefined the meaning of that name in this generation.
Yeah.
And so that's what we're talking about is how does the next generation make a name for themselves? And in the end, actually ends up solidifying the legacy of their predecessors because of what this young man's doing in football right now in this city. His dad's name will never be forgotten. Now think about that. And these are things that a lot of times we don't realize these dynamics as we're living our life, as we're raising our families, as we're building our businesses. And so what I tend to do is give that what I call a press box view so that the family offices who are busting their tail doing what they got to do every day, building assets, maintaining all of the financial affairs of our family and of our businesses, realize that there's more going on here than just building monetary wealth. We want to build that generational wealth beyond the money. And that's, I think, Patrick Mahomes is Patrick Mahomes II is one of the greatest examples of people who are doing that right now in 2024.
Well, and I think that is so. Now, when we think about Patrick Mahomes and in his generation of wealth building and all the success he's having, when we talk about carrying forward to the next generations, you've actually mentioned a number of times in our conversations, and I know, we've talked about generational wealth beyond money. So
Mm-hmm.
if you were giving advice to Patrick, and as a great way, I think, for us to kind of, wrap up the conversation for today, what does that mean? Can you share a little bit more and kind of bring us home with that?
I think when you're in that position as one of the top athletes on the planet, or you're in a position where you're in a prestigious family business or prestigious position, A lot of times from the outside looking in, people will assume, innocently assume, that having a bunch of wealth and fame equals happiness, fulfillment, and satisfaction. So when I look at somebody like Patrick Mahomes, the question I would have to ask him is, when if you, always, especially as a quarterback, you got to think about your teammates. You got to think about, your coaches and working well with other people. You got your wife, you got your family. Is, a lot of times we're focused outwards. Just take a moment, take a deep breath and turn that focus inward and just ask yourself some honest questions. And the one question that comes to mind right now is there anything in my world that when I think about it doesn't feel so good? Is there something from the past that when I think about it now, I still feel, frustration, irritation, or, sadness, fear of something, maybe fear of losing all of this thing, maybe, recognizing that, part of me doesn't necessarily feel worthy of all of this. And if we eliminate those things, you'll actually be freed up to have much more impact than you're already having. And so the thing is, there's really no limit to our personal development and growth from a mental, emotional, spiritual aspect. And I want to clarify that when I say spiritual, there is a difference between spirituality and religion. And even though they are connected, they are not the exact same thing. And so, it's like the difference between your mind and your brain. Your brain is part of your physiology, but your mind is more etheric and actually channels through the brain. And that's how you become aware of your thoughts and your emotions. And so, connect with, what's going on with me from that spiritual standpoint. Whether you have a religious practice or not is really not what I'm talking about. It's like, just, how do you feel about your purpose? How do you feel about yourself? How do you feel about your success? How do you feel about the aspects of life where maybe you feel like you haven't had enough success, or maybe there's places where you have insecurities that you can't address, especially because of your success and your wealth. So you can actually have the resources to handle issues that other people may think there's nothing I can do about it. Is recognize the position you're in, and that as much value as you bring to everyone else, how can I turn that same value on myself and make sure I treat myself with the same respect, reverence, and love, or as I like to say, treat myself with the same aloha that I'm showing the rest of the world. And recognize that there's always somewhere we can improve, especially on a personal level, no matter how good things are going financially or in terms of our careers.
Well, and Chukky, so I mean, in the relatively short time, last couple of months that I've had the opportunity to get to know you, it was such a great kickstart, and well, actually, we connected a number of months ago, and then we finally got to spend some time together.
Right.
I'm really excited about the ways that we talked about that you're working with families, and certainly the alignment with what we share with everyone here for Family Office Association. And so for those of you, again, I know many of you, or most in fact, play this as a podcast later, as a webcast playback. So we look forward to you being able to hear today's cast. And then Chukky, I know we're going to be coming back to people with sort of how we can follow up and some of the programming that we've been talking about in the future. So we'll encourage everybody to keep their eyes out, and especially as we head toward the fall, and we have the FOA Summit coming up, among other things, that people have the opportunity to connect with you and learn more, and keep following what you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's really, important for people to recognize that whatever you think you are, you're so much more than that. No matter how much success, or no matter what the balance sheet says, there's a lot more you're worth so much more than whatever amount of money, however many assets you have or in the process of creating and developing. It's just recognizing that, especially for me, and I imagine there's a number of people who may be listening right now who are first generation millionaires. and, have a vision of making sure that this positive success that they've created in their family at this level with this generation continues on and on and on. And so, again, I got to go back to, one of my idols from history, Andrew Carnegie, and recognizing that he's not somebody that came from money. He was a first generation millionaire. And all these years later, we can see how whatever he did, the family's been able to carry on the traditions. And so really what it comes down to is recognizing that for each and every one of us, there was a source where this started. It is somebody, a grandparent, a great grandparent, a great 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 grandparent, somebody decided to change the dynamics of their world. Mm-hmm. They were able to accomplish that. So how do we make sure that the values, the family values, the mindset, the motivation, and the clarity of focus on what they were creating is maintained over time? Not just the money, but the source, whatever was going on in Carnegie's mind, but more importantly, whatever was going on in his heart. How do we maintain that over time? And working together, with FOA, there's a lot of different ways that, it's multi-layered. There's definitely more aspects to it in terms of my mental discipline, in terms of emotional discipline. And I'm just excited for all the different possibilities of collaboration and the value that together we can bring to these families, not just here in Kansas City, but, globally, when you think about it.
Absolutely. Well, Chukky, thank you so much again for being a part of the show today. And we do, our listeners actually across the country, across the world. And so with that, actually, I want to keep in mind and wish great success to, on our prior show, we had Michael Zhu and Jason Ho on, and I know they have kicked off their event in Macau, where I know they're expecting, I think it's last count was around 20,000 people in attendance there. So it's going to be a crazy week there, but wishing everybody the best. And again, Chukky, we'll be following up with everyone. So again, if you've been listening, if you have comments, questions, send them in and we'll be sure to follow up. Thank you again for joining us today.
All right. Mahalo and aloha. Thank you for having me here. And I look forward to, adding more value to those that FOA serves globally.
Pleasure. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you.
Take care, everyone. We'll talk to you next week.